Note to self. Amen. Next time I do help with a child dedication, you are not supposed to give the anointing oil to the child. Because then they will try to eat it and drink it. And so, sorry about that, Newcombs. All right, my name is Matthew, and I'm the pastor here at Point Church, Cary. This is our last week of our series, Making Change. So I'm so glad that y'all are here for this. This has been making change in a variety of ways. The first week was making change in our perspective. We're not going to make changes in our finances if we don't change the way we view our finances. And if we don't change to have our perspective be God's perspective of our finances. Last week, can we just give a hand for our executive pastor, Jeremy Hyde, did a great job last week. And he hit some really practical areas of how we can make changes within our budgets and how we can make change in our relationship with debt and create margin. So making changes so we can actually have margin in our finances. And this week, this is the week that everybody's like, oh, okay, I knew it was going to end here. You're right. So it is a series on money, and we are talking about giving, okay? Unashamedly. And so Jeremy mentioned two phrases last week, and I'm going to repeat those again. And then I'm going to add another one, okay? We'll see if you like this one. The first one, so last week he said less is more. Less is more. The next one he said we all agree with. All right, say it with me. Stress is bad. We all got that one, all right? How about this one? Giving is good. See, we all agree stress is bad. It takes us a while to embrace the less is more, but like the giving is good thing, like that's a hard one to grab a hold of. Who here can all agree receiving is good? Say that with me. Receiving is good. Now, did that feel right? Like that one just really rings true because we all like to receive. But the truth is that giving is good as well. And so I have a couple points I want to make this morning about giving and showing how Scripture teaches us that giving is good. If we can't come to the place where giving is good, we probably won't be good at giving. If we can't come to the place where we realize that giving is good, we probably won't be very good at giving because we will do in this life what we think is good for us. That is what you will do. And we do that very often with our faith, okay? And there's a reason out of all the spiritual disciplines, and giving is a discipline. It is a rhythm. There is a reason this is the one that we don't do the most. I mean, it's like, well, hey, if I pray, I'll feel closer to God. If I do this, I'll feel closer to God. But the reality is we hold on to our money because that's the area where we still very often hold on to that idol because it's something where we lack trust in God. And it's just something that we haven't clicked in our mind to see that it is good. So that today I hope that we unpack that a little bit and show that it is good. So here's the first point. I do have points. Your mind might explode because I normally don't have these. So giving is good because it blesses the giver. Starting off with the point. Giving is good because it blesses the giver. Now, let me make sure I unpack that sentence. I am not saying if you give, you are guaranteed to get more money. I am not saying that. Can we all put that on record? I did not say that, okay? Did Matthew say that? Okay, thank you. I did not say that, but I want us to look at this verse. Acts 20:35. Remembering the words the Lord Jesus himself said, it is more to give than to receive. Now notice what it said. It says, the blessing is in the giving. So if the whole motive that you have from the beginning is I'm going to come and I'm going to give to God so that I might gain something, you've missed the whole entire perspective of this verse. The goal is not to give to gain. The goal is to give because giving is a blessing in and of itself. We can connect with this, can we not? Anybody enjoy receiving presents at Christmas? Okay, we all do. But like, let's face it, don't we all kind of still enjoy handing a gift to somebody? Isn't there something in that feels good to be like, man, like it felt good to give somebody a present? You know what that's called? The image of God. I can't think of anything else that would be. We are naturally selfish people. There's something that's odd to me that clicks, that feels good inside of a human, even a non-believer, that something feels right to give something to somebody. That to me screams the image of God. What else could that be? But you know what that means? There's something inside of us that says we were created to be generous. Why? Because we were created by a generous God. He didn't program you to be generous because he thought that'd be cool. He programmed you to be generous because he was the model. He was the model and he is generous. And so with the reason this verse says that it is more blessed to give than receive, the question is, will we choose to believe that? More blessed. It does not say it is blessed to give and it is blessed to receive. It says more. And we live in a world that says, I want more. If there's more of something, I want the more. Who here wants, if it's good? Who here wants, if there's something good, you want more of it? Okay? Now the question is, if it says that giving is what brings, it's more blessed to give than to receive. If we're just logical people that are adding up an equation, what do you want to do more in your life, give or receive? Give. Now that's just us, hashing this out. But the question is, do we believe that's true or not? This is Paul quoting the words of Jesus, saying that it is more blessed to give than receive. Not that if I give, I'll receive blessing. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but what it's saying is that giving is a blessing. That giving is a blessing. Here's the second thing. Giving is good because giving is worship. Giving is good because it is worship. Who here would agree with me that worship is a good thing? All right, now let's do a little unpacking of what worship is. Worship is not just singing, okay? It's not just singing. I love praise and worship. It's my favorite part of the service. I like that more than preaching, okay? I would love to just sing. But I love praise and worship, but every single thing we do in this service is worship. And honestly, everything you do in your life is worship. It's just a matter of who you're worshiping. Because everything you do in every single moment is declaring worth to something. You're saying, I'm doing this with my time, with my money, with my thoughts because I think it's worth doing. That's how we operate. We're worshipers. Worship is to declare the worth of, okay? And so giving, we very often get to, well, that's just legalistic. That's just religion. No. It's worship. What could be more worship than declaring the worth of God with the currency that our world says that, what worth is? The way we determine worth is through money in our world. What could be more a sign of worship than to say, I'm going to take what our world says is worth something and say, I think you're worth everything to me. That's worship. And what Satan gets into the minds of the churches and the way that we've had tough experiences and painful experiences, a lot of weird teachings about giving, is that one of the things I think the enemy's done is he's robbed us from seeing that giving is worship. It's worship, and I love to worship God. And it comes from Proverbs chapter 3, verse 9. It says, honor the Lord with your wealth. I love it. I love that it doesn't just say, give it. No, it says, honor him. Makes me think of the Magi that came when Jesus was born. They came and it's like, well, what should I do if I'm in the presence of the King of the world? Oh, I should give treasure to him. I should give what this world says is amazing and say, I'm going to give that to him because he's more amazing than anything I could give. And so it's honor. And so I want you to think about this when you give. Please don't just give to give. Okay, now I will say there are times in life that we give out of obedience even when you don't feel like it, right? Okay, because I think one of the wrong teachings that's happened in church is well, if your heart's not in it, don't do it. False. You should still be obedient. You just need to be honest. It's okay to be like, Lord, I don't feel like doing this today, but I just want to come to you and say, I don't feel like this, but I choose to come to you anyway. Okay? That's at least your heart being honest. But the answer isn't well, hey, if I don't feel like it, I'm just not going to be obedient today. No, nowhere is that found. Okay? It's a matter of coming with authenticity and honesty. But honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to the overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. Here's the third point. Giving is good because it establishes perspective and priority. Giving is good because it establishes perspective and priority. I think one of the challenges we all deal with in life is we have a hard time prioritizing what goes where in the org chart of life. Okay, here's my to-do list. Anybody get overwhelmed by a to-do list? Some of y'all are good at them. They scare me to death. Okay, we've been trying to learn this new Asana software that all this other stuff, and it's super scary, and it's trying to make me efficient. And so I'm trying, but it's hard for me to figure out what I'm supposed to do. You know what's great? God helps determine what's priorities for us. And a lot of times we're like, well, I don't like God telling me what to do. Maybe if we got out of this idea of wanting to be our own God, we could see his commands as helping us learn how to be prioritized. And so giving can help us with our priorities and our perspective. I'm going to read this chunk from 1 Chronicles chapter 29. You can go back and read this for yourself. But this is a little nugget here that connects with the first week, but also helps understand a little bit more. David is the most legendary king in the people of Israel in the Old Testament. He was a man after God's own heart. But who here knows that there was only one perfect person and his name was Jesus, okay? His name was not David. David longed to build the temple. He longed to build this temple where the presence of God was to dwell. And this was a dream of his, but you know what got in the way of his dream? His sinful dreams. His desire for control, his desire for violent conquering, this got in the way. And so God said, you will not be the one to build this. Your son Solomon will be. But what's amazing is even though he was not going to be able to build it, he said, I want to invest all I have left in it. And so at the end of his life, he said, I'm going to give above and beyond, which we'll get to later, a tithe. I'm going to give above and beyond that, like abundantly of my treasure. And you know what happened? His generosity was contagious, and all these other people said, we will too. But what I want you to see is David's heart when he gave. Here, like, if you want to look at, hey, is there a passage I could read before I give on a regular basis? I would say yes. This is not the only one. I'm not saying it's a rule. Just jot this one down and read this as a prayer out loud when you give. First Chronicles chapter 29, verses 10 through 14. It says, David praised the Lord in the presence of the whole assembly. One of the first things you can do when you give is to praise. It will help when you give, because if you give begrudgingly, it's hard to do that while you're praising. And so if you praise as you give, it gets the order right. It says, praise be to you, Lord, the God of our father Israel, from everlasting to everlasting. Yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor. For everything in heaven and earth is yours. Yours, Lord, is the kingdom. You are exalted as head over all. If you pray that before you give, man, that just makes that a whole lot easier, because like the one I'm giving to is all in all. He is all in all. The greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty. Like, it's like, yes, Lord, whatever you say. Because so often I'm debating with God whether I want to do what he wants me to do or not. What? Like, he's God. And this is who he is. But then it says this in verse 12. Wealth and honor come from you. Oh, man. What a good reminder as I give. Wealth and honor come from you. You are the ruler of all things, including my money. In your hands are strength and power, and to exalt and give strength to all. Verse 13, now our God, we give you thanks and praise your glorious name. He gives thanks as he gives. He gives thanks as he gives. But look at verse 14. This is what I want you to hold on to. But who am I? Who am I and who are my people that we should be able to give generously as this? What? We've been missing the conversation so often, followers of Jesus, of like, what is it? This percentage, is it law? Is it new covenant, old covenant? Like, listen, here's what the New Testament teaches me. It's not about what I have to do. It's about what I get to do. And David understood this before Pentecost. He said, look, I cannot believe, who am I that I get to invest in the temple? Listen, when you give to the church, you know what you're investing in? The temple. Because we are the people of God. And we are where the temple dwells. We are the temple. And it says that he's like, who am I that I get to give to this? You know, our world says, who am I that you would give me this gift? David says, who am I that I get to give this gift? He has the perspective, right? And then it says, everything comes from you, and we have given you only what comes from your hand. There it is. Because what happens is like, I just don't know if I can let go of what's mine. David's like, it never was. Going back to first week, it's like, what I give you is what you gave me. That's why we use the phrase, give back to God. It's not like you're giving God something that's like, hey, like, you know, I hope you're impressed with this. He's like, man, that's mine. Like, that's mine. You gave me back what I gave you. I don't have a fourth point for this, but I'm going to read this passage. And I'll just kind of make this statement. When you think about people in your life that are super godly, super spirit-filled, I've noticed that sometimes we have like little, we have a picture of what these people look like. Let me tell you, if you know someone that's filled with the Spirit, but they're not generous, I'm confused. I'm just confused. Because I haven't met someone deep with the Lord in spirituality that had shallow pockets when it came to generosity. Because let me tell you, if someone is filled with the Spirit, they're being made into the image and the likeness of Jesus, and Jesus is nothing if he is not generous. Tell me what the cross is if it's not generosity. And Jesus spoke about this. And so Luke 16:11. So who here wants to go deeper with Jesus? Anybody want to go deeper with Jesus? Okay. So I think we like to talk about that. As a preacher, one of the things I've heard for 12 and a half years is like, can you just, like, we want some deeper stuff, you know? It's like, all right. Do you really? Okay, like, let's read this first then. Luke 16:11. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? So what's true riches? I think there's different levels that the Lord wants to take you to, but if he can't trust you with worldly wealth, he cannot trust you with heavenly treasure. And so I think that there's different levels of depth that he wants to go in intimacy with you. And I'm not here to tell you what all that looks like. I'm just telling you this verse is saying something that I think we all act like we want, but we don't really want it because we're not willing to let go of the things of this world. And so there's new levels he wants to unleash in you of intimacy, of giftedness, and all these other things. And I think he's like, look, he's like, if I can trust you with a little bit, then I can trust you with more. And you're like, well, that sounds good. You trust me with a little money, you're going to give me more money. That's not what the verse just said. What he's saying is, if I can learn to trust you with earthly treasure, then I want to give you true riches in the spirit realm. And I think there's something there that we need to grab a hold of, is that we all act like we want more of God. And he says, I won't know that you want more of me until you let go of the God of this world. See, in the Old Testament, they would go around and they would tear down the high places where all these idols were. In America, it's called tearing down our control and need to hold on to money. We don't see that we have idols. We just happen to have them in our bank. Okay, like we don't have them set up in our living rooms, except we do. They're called televisions, and they're called cars, and they're called clothes, and they're called all these things. So I hope you feel warm and fuzzy after all this so far, right? Isn't that good? And so here's the thing I want to challenge you with is, where do we go from here? What do I give? So here's what I want to challenge you with. The good news is this. It's like we could always be like, what am I supposed to give? This is very confusing. Biblically, I know this can be debated, and that's okay, and you can disagree with me, and you can throw things at me, and I'll dodge them. That's fine. And so the thing is this, is that the scriptures teach us there's a couple rhythms in life that were in the Old Testament that I think that still are beneficial in the New Testament. I don't think if you don't do these now, it makes you unclean and you can't come to church. It's not the point. But I think they're still beneficial in the rhythms that are existent that were before the law in the Old Testament, that were before then, and I think still carry after. One of those is the Sabbath. I'm not saying like you have to keep the Sabbath or you can't walk more than a third of the mile or all this other things. But if you look back, what was it rooted in? Not the law, the 7 days of creation. God rested, and we were created to work and rest, and I think it's beneficial. Same thing with something called the tithe. Is in the Old Testament, it was something called the tithe. You give a tenth of what you have. And this was something that happened before the law. This goes back to Abraham. This goes back to Jacob. And I think this is something even Jesus had an opportunity to refute in Matthew 23. And he's like, hey, he said this in Matthew 23, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin. So they would literally tithe not just their money, but their crops. And these were really small things. He says, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Here it is. You should have practiced the latter, which was tithing, without neglecting the former. And here's what that means to me. Listen, Jesus said it once in the New Testament. That's all he said about tithe. Like, Jesus only said it once. And I'm like, I think once matters. I think once still matters. I think that still says something to him, that this is still valuable. Also, at minimum, let me say this. I think one of the biggest problems we have in the church is if we're arguing about percentages when it comes to giving, we're missing the entire point. Like, we're missing the point. Like, if it's like, man, like, I don't know about that percentage. Listen, let me just break this down. Thank God Jesus wasn't debating about how much percent of his blood to shed for you. And thank God he wasn't like, well, hey, like, I think I'm going to give up 10%. He went 100. And because the reality is, the problem with understanding the tithe the wrong way is it's not that you give 10% and 90% is mine. No. Like, the 10% is your first and your best. This is creating a rhythm. This is like, who here needs regular rhythms in your life? Okay? And sometimes we look at the law in the Old Testament and it's like, well, hey, this was all just rigid and terrible. No, we need structure in our lives. And so while we're not bound by it anymore, we're set free by the goodness of some of these things. And I think the tithe actually sets up a good principle, is that I'm going to give my first and my best, like Cain and Abel. Abel, the reason Cain was jealous was God approved of Abel's sacrifice. Why? It was his first and his best. He gave of the best of what he had. So that means that the biblical principle of giving 10%, the first 10%, is that I'm going to give a tithe before I give to Uncle Sam. I'm going to give a tithe before I pay that bill. I'm going to give a tithe before I do that thing. You're like, well, those got to get done. It's like, but the Lord is first. Please don't view the tithe as a bill. You don't pay a tithe. You do not pay a tithe. You offer a tithe. It is a sacrifice. It is worship. It is a gift. This is not like, if you start viewing Jesus as a line item on your budget, then you will look at him as something that's draining your finances instead of you investing in the kingdom. Because all the other expenses you pay to actually just suck out of your bank account. But this one, invest where your monies don't rise, but the kingdom does. And so if you just view it as a line item on a budget, as something you're paying, you're missing the point. Also, the thing for me in the New Testament is, if anything, the percentage would go up. And I think something we've missed is like, well, hey, this is not meant to be shame. Okay, let me actually, before I go any further, let me just speak to an elephant in the room. Who here grew up in church and heard some teachings on giving that were really jacked up? Anybody? Okay. Anybody just like, you, like when I even mentioned the tithe, it was like, you got triggered. You're like, I'm walking. It's like, I'm out. I know where this goes. And I get it. Listen, there are people that told you things like, if you don't tithe this week, you might get struck by lightning. You're like, that didn't happen. Yeah, it does. There are people that literally are sitting in this room that live with that, and that is their memory of the word I just said. When I think about giving and all these other things, the trigger right now is that if I don't do this, then God hates me. Listen, there ain't a thing you could do in this world that would make God hate you. And it changed, like that whole perspective is the wrong way to view giving in the first place. It's an invitation, not an obligation. Obedience is not meant to be an obligation. It's meant to be, holiness is a standard, but it's an invitation. And that's where we've missed this. And so I just want to speak to the room and know that there's some of you in here when I talk about this that you're like, my ears are already clogged. I've heard this before. Also, I just want to speak to the fact some of y'all came in here with church hurt. I did this last service. It actually scared me, okay? How many of y'all actually been through a church split? Okay. Anybody that raised your hand, you don't have to raise it, but has that made it hard to give to church again? I mean, I could see that being difficult for people. They're just being honest. Is that, you've looked at this. It's like, hey, anybody ever here when you buy a product, you ever read the reviews? Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe you've had some bad reviews in churches. And you're like, man, it's kind of hard for me to think about giving to this thing. When my wife and I first started tithing, I can't speak completely for her, but when we got married, as an individual, before we started this church, I worked at my home church, and so, sorry to the past. I was a little bit more arrogant back then, still deal with pride like anybody, but I was like, you know what, like I can get down with the tithe, but I'm going to do it my way. So here's what I did. I would write checks, and in the memo, I would write to what departments I was giving to, okay? And here's what you have to understand. This was not out of a good heart because I believed in like, hey, like I just wanted to give extra. It's like, I only believe in this. I was like creating my own little buckets of the things that I actually thought the church was doing well. And then it's also, I was like, well, hey, and I'm not saying this is wrong either. I just want to speak to my experience. I was like, okay, like I don't want to give 10% at the church, but I'm going to give 10% a bunch of different places. I'm not being legalistic. This is something I've wrestled with in my own life, and just want to put that there. I think that God's given us an opportunity to give a tithe, and I think that the place that makes the most sense is to the local church, because why? I believe that the local church is God's plan A, which means that I think it's awesome to give to plan B, C, D, and E, but I think giving plan A to its priority matters. And I think a long time ago, I was trying to tithe in such a way where I still had control. I wanted to give in such a way where I could control the result and I could still be God. And so I want to release you of the idea that if you're still trying to control things as you give, then the money that you're trying to give still controls you. And part of what the goal of why giving is a blessing to you is it's meant to set you free of this thing that controls you. Also, maybe some of you look back and you're like, man, I cannot believe I gave and that leader fell. Can I tell you something? That money wasn't all wasted, though. Maybe the enemy's got in your head. It's like all that money, all that time, all that effort, all that serving, all that time at that church. People's lives were still changed for Jesus. Some negative things happened in your life and in that church, and I am sorry. But that doesn't mean all of that money was not an investment in the kingdom. You still stand as a result of some of that fruit that got tainted, but you're still here. And I want you to know that releasing that money is also a big part of that is releasing control. And part of that tithe is to say, I release control to that to you, Lord. You're giving it to Jesus. You're entrusting him with it. He's the head of the church. Anybody find the church messy? Okay, I do. I lead one. But the truth is, when we give, we trust the head of the church, and his name is Jesus. It's like, hey, I leave this in your hands. The church is a mess because I work at one, and I'm a mess, and the staff's a mess, and we're wonderful. I love our staff, and y'all are beautiful, and you're a mess too. And I just want to invite you to maybe view a tithe in a new way. When Jesus very often, he would say, hey, you've heard it said, do not commit adultery. I say, do not lust. Or you said, hey, you've heard do not murder. That's a good one. He says, do not have anger in your heart. If anything, I feel like the New Testament would take generosity further. He would take it further, not being like, well, hey, the New Testament goes from 10 to 20. I think the point is, hey, the Holy Spirit's going to lead you. And so if you started to tithe, the thing can be like, what do you lead me to do next? Just to give a couple examples of what that can be. There's like tithes, which is the standard and the base, and there's the offerings. Like, and I'm not saying this to boast. I'm just saying, like, I've admitted this has been a hard journey for me, but I can tell you since my wife and I started tithing, there's not been one time that we regretted it. Now, I can't tell you that did not always mean we had more money. Because if you're looking for that, I'm not offering you that, but I can tell you I feel like we were blessed in the process, and money had something that was less of a hold on us. There was also a time we were moving into a building, and we needed Chris Hankins, bless him. He said, Matthew, you need to get 10 families together and raise $100,000 in a week. I was like, all right, man. And God did that thing. But one of those things with my wife, and I knew we had to be a part of it, and I'm not going to get specific, but the Lord, I was scared to death to talk to my wife that night, scared. Like, I felt like the Lord had told me a specific amount, and I waited till she was about to fall asleep. And but the thing was, is the Lord led us to literally look at our bank account and our savings and everything we owned, and basically the number was half of everything. It was half of what we had that we gave to that. You know what? We had less for quite some time, but we haven't regretted that ever for a second. There's been times where he said, hey, why don't you double the percent or add a couple percents? It's a fun journey to watch what the Holy Spirit does, but I will tell you the baseline has been that the tithe has been the standard for us. And it's given us a place to where it's not like, hey, we give in seasons and not in seasons. It gives us a chance to where we always give. I also want to share this other part that's helpful. Anybody ever been in a church where the people that had the most money tried to control the church? Oh, man, I'm hitting all y'all with some stuff right now. You know what the tithe does, though? It abolishes that. You know why? Because 10% of 200,000 and 10% of 20,000 is still the same amount of that person. And it makes the wealthy not be the people that say, hey, I can control everything, because it can be like, no, people still gave of themselves just as much as you gave of yourself. In fact, and so like I think there's beauty in what God did there, and equality and a lot of different things. And so what I would encourage you to do is this, like, the series ends with a giving challenge. You can go to pointchurch.com/tithe. You can write that down right now. Just pointchurch.com/tithe. We're having just inviting you to jump in this journey. Say, hey, you know what? Like I'll step out and I'll be obedient in this, or you know, like I'll jump into this challenge for 3 months. And I'll tell you this: if like after 3 months of this, you're like, this was dumb. That's okay. Like we'll give you your money back. Absolutely. Like we will do that. But the thing is, we'll do this alongside you. We'll come along and support you. We'll pray with you. We'll encourage you. You know, and so if you just go to pointchurch.com/tithe, even if you're already tithing, I would encourage you still to do that. Just still go there and say, hey, you know, like we're going to continue to do this. And I think it's just going to be something where what could God do at our church if we all gave in this way? And I think sometimes you're like, well, hey, there's no need for us to do this because it's already functioning. The question is, how much more of the triangle could we reach? And I want you to know, like, when you give, what are the things it goes to? Who here thinks it's amazing that these children right now are being pointed to Jesus? When you give, that's what that goes to. Like Student Point, I just came to a movie night on Friday night, and it was amazing. We sat here with some other families, and the students came in and served us, and they took our orders. And what Kelly and the leaders are doing is phenomenal. My son goes to core group every week with a couple other kids, and they're reading the Bible and praying together. And just what happens on Sunday nights and the other things, amazing leaders. How does that happen? It comes because of what you give. Okay, like when I think about the things like we want to lead the way as a church, 10% of everything that is given leaves Point Church. That will always be a commitment, and that number wants to increase over the years. I want to see that number go up because it is more than that, but that's the standard for us. When you give every single week and it goes to Point and you give to the general ministry, 10% of that goes away, and part of that goes to help pay for food that over 100 families come and get every single week here at the Cary Pantry. It's kind of a big deal. That doesn't happen without you. And the question is, could we do more if there were, like, absolutely. And so there's so many things. Also, this building, who here, like, the thing that's always embarrassing as a pastor to say is that giving to actually pay the bills does matter. Do you know in this building, ministry happens 7 days a week, every single week? There is something in here happening where ministry is happening and lives are being changed. And I thank God for this building. I thank God that God's given it to us. And so when you give, it goes to a lot of these different things. It goes to our staff. And I think that's a biblical thing as well, to take care of your staff and to continue to take better care of your staff. I say that strangely because it's me, but I say that even more for the rest of my team. It matters. It matters, and also it helps us reach our community and do even more and more and more. And so I just invite you, if you've dealt with shame and if you've dealt with guilt and you've dealt with a lot of different teachings that have really rubbed you the wrong way, and even if today this rubbed you the wrong way, that's okay. My name's simple. It's Matthew@pointchurch.com. You can set up a meeting with me, and I'd love just to sit down and talk with you about it. I'm not here to beat anybody up about anything. I'd love to have a conversation. But here's what I believe. It's more blessed to give than receive. And I think we all desire a blessing, and we would like to be blessed, and that comes through giving. So I encourage you to pointchurch.com/tithe, take the challenge, and let's watch what God does in your life. I don't care so much about what happens in the budget. God will be good, but I can't wait to see what God does in you. Let's pray.